President Donald Trump has hailed the eternal bond between the U.S. and U.K. in a state banquet held in his honor.
King Charles hosted him to an historic second state visit at Windsor Castle. Unprecedented pomp and pageantry greeted the U.S. leader and the First Lady as they were treated to a royal carriage procession and what's believed to be the largest military ceremonial welcome for a state visit in living memory.
But serious work likely ahead, that is, with President Trump set to meet Prime Minister Keir Starmer for talks today. Trade, the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, and cooperation in technology and climate all on the agenda as the leaders look to cement the special relationship between the two powers. And for more, let's speak now with Charles Kupchan. He's a senior fellow of Council on Foreign Relations, and he is joining us this morning from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Charles. So we know that Mr. Trump is known to enjoy, pomp and pageantry, but how effective is this extravagant royal rollout as a form of soft power over him? Or is there a limit to how far this flattery can go?
I think what we're seeing here is that the Europeans, including the British, have figured Trump out. And that is, be nice to the guy, fet him, flatter him, don't stand up to him, and keep him on your side. And in some ways, this is the pinnacle of that effort because of all the pomp and circumstance. But we saw it at the NATO summit. We saw it when Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, came to Washington to meet Trump. He brought with him 7 other European leaders. They all said nice things to Trump. Those leaders who have stood up to Trump, Mr. Lula in Brazil, Prime Minister Modi in India, didn't go very well. They've been hit with sanctions. They're in the penalty box. So I think the Europeans have basically figured out to keep Trump on their side, be nice to the guy.
Dr. Kupchan, now that the mood music, if you like, has played, King Charles praising Trump's personal commitment to solving world conflicts, the real work begins today with Keir Starmer. We know trade, the wars in Ukraine and Gaza sit right at the top. So are you expecting any real progress, on these issues? You were hinting that that might not happen. So is it going to be more like the low-lying fruit? Tech, civilian nuclear power, perhaps?
Yeah, I think if there are going to be any breakthroughs or deliverables, they will be in the trade space. A trade deal has been struck between the U.S. and the U.K., but the terms have yet to be finalized. And the British are looking to see tariffs on steel and aluminum come down from 25% to 0. There's also a deal that's being worked up on high tech, having OpenAI, having NVIDIA, other American companies invest in the UK, semiconductors, AI, quantum computing. And there's also a discussion about joint production of small nuclear reactors that could be used to power these new AI data centers that are going to be popping up everywhere. The geopolitical issues, tougher. I'm not sure that you're going to see Trump make any major announcements on Ukraine, either more sanctions on Russia or arms to Ukraine. He's not there yet. And on Gaza, there is a difference of opinion between the U.S. and the U.K. U.K. said they're going to recognize Palestine as a state at the upcoming UN General Assembly. Trump doesn't like that.
Okay, Charles, how much does then Mr. Trump need this visit, and what exactly does he want to get out of it?
I think in some ways Trump needs a break. There are a lot of intense things happening here in the United States, ranging from a question of funding the government to the assassination of Charlie Kirk a few days ago. He's being followed around by this swirl over Mr. Epstein, which has engulfed the UK because the ambassador from the UK to the United States was just pulled because of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So I think this is a way of changing the narrative, looking good, pomp and circumstance, red carpets, riding in carriages drawn by fine horses. Tomorrow they get down to work. But again, I don't think there's going to be really big news coming out of this bilateral.
Dr. Kupchan, I would suggest that Keir Starmer actually needs a break as well right now. His polling numbers are terrible. Unhappiness over the cost of living, immigration, poor public services. I'm wondering whether you think he might cede ground to the US, so that he can gain some ground at home?
A visit by Trump is really a mixed blessing. On the one hand, he wants to showcase the US-UK special relationship that goes really back to the beginning of the 20th century, started in the late 19th century. The US and the UK really have been each other's closest partners now for about 125 years. And so having an American president has a certain cachet. Trump is not popular in the UK. Opinion polls show him at having a 60% disapproval rate. There are protests all over London as we speak. So in that sense, I think Starmer has to be nice to Trump, has to get Trump on his side, but can't be seen as a poodle who is getting down on his knees and doing what he needs to do to the American president, because that's not going to go over well with the UK public.
And just before his arrival in the UK, US tech firms like Google, OpenAI, and especially Microsoft, and I think you mentioned this very briefly earlier, they announced big investment plans in the UK. I'm just wondering, is there something more to this other than just sound business decisions? Because Trump, as we know, usually prefers capex inflows and not outflows.
I think in some ways what we're looking at is the commercialization and financialization of American foreign policy. Yes, Trump has to deal with the wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, and other geopolitical issues. But increasingly, we're seeing diplomacy focus on business deals. The UAE and the United States AI data centers, US, UK investment in high tech. The United States is now taking shares in companies like Intel. Trump told NVIDIA, the big chip maker, that he wants the United States to get a share of sales of chips to China. So I think increasingly we're going to see Trump, the businessman, the real estate mogul, looking at diplomacy as a way of doing business.
And you earlier touched on the European dimension. I wonder what sort of message does this sort of red carpet treatment send to Brussels, Paris, perhaps Kyiv? Is Britain trying to position itself as Trump's preferred gateway into Europe?
I don't think Britain is alone. We've seen Mr. Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Macron, the President of France, Alexander Stubb, the President of Finland, Mr. Zelensky himself, after getting off on the wrong foot with Trump. They all have figured out that they want to be nice to Trump, bring him in, have him as a friend. That works much better than getting into arguments with him. And Europe right now is not in a position to really go off on its own, to stand up to Trump, to countenance dealing with Russia without American help. And there's a lot of political instability in Europe now. The center is hollowing out in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Poland, in Italy. And this is not a moment, I think, when the Europeans are in any position to really countenance some sort of fundamental strategic rift with the United States. That's one of the reasons they're working so hard to keep Trump tied into Europe.
Dr. Kupchan, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. Charles Kupchan is Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And thank you very much for joining us, sir.